everyone, it's Jen from practicalbydefault.com, solutions for the working homeschool mom. And today I wanted to share with you a discussion I had with some friends. And it was about, what do you stand for? As a person, sometimes we have different ideas of the way things should look, or maybe we take a different angle or a different direction from those around us. So one of the things as a homeschool mom that I feel is really important is to really understand what you stand for. And so one thing that I stand for is that homeschooling has the flexibility to look like whatever it is that you need it to look like. There is not one way to do this thing. And it's funny how many people out there have this idea of what homeschooling should look like. You know, we scroll through our Facebook feed or our Instagram feed or photos, wherever we see them, Pinterest, and we see these images of what homeschooling should look like. You know, they're at the table, or they're at their desk, or they're snuggled up on the couch reading. And those are wonderful things if that works for your family. It's great. Dryer. Sorry. See, I'm real. Dryer's going, and I might actually remember that, but probably not. Anyway, my point is that I firmly believe that as great as that is, there is not one way to homeschool. And so it's funny when I hear people asking for advice. You know, they say, oh, what should I do? Or what should I watch? Or what should I use? Or how should I homeschool my kids? And I think that's great. We all need advice. But when we read that advice, I also feel it's really vital to remember that it's you, your family, your homeschool, and your life that needs to be taken into consideration. Because, for example, if you said to me that every single day that I absolutely needed to spend 30 minutes reading aloud with my children, I would say, thank you. And then I would move on and do what's right for me. See, that wouldn't work for my kids. They would flip out. We're not really big on reading aloud. I know, shocker, right? I'm a homeschool mom who doesn't spend a lot of time reading aloud to our kids because it doesn't work for us and we don't really like it. But I do read aloud to my kids, just not every single day. Just like sitting down and doing traditional homeschooling things doesn't always work for us. It's our schedule. It's too hectic. I can't say every Monday we're going to do this, this, and this because I might have to go to work or I might have an appointment. Homeschooling is very flexible. And so it's very, I can't think of another word, but vital for you to remember that when you're reading other people's advice. Always, always do what is best for you. When it comes to curriculum, you need to consider how your child learns, but you also need to consider what your lifestyle is like. Nadine says, I say thank you and then move on and do what I want anyway. Seriously, the best advice we can give. Absolutely. It's so, so important. I mean, it's important to listen and consider, to learn to look outside the box, maybe of what we thought it would be. But at the same time, it's really important to do what works. And sometimes it takes us a long time to figure that out. And just when you figure it out, it changes, because that's what happens, or at least in my life. Either our schedule changes, or the kids' learning style changes, or their interests change. And so because homeschooling is flexible, we can kind of roll with that, which is really, really nice. So as I was saying, when it comes to curriculum, some people will say, oh, you must use all online programs. Others will say, oh no, don't use that, it's too much screen time, use all offline programs. I say, do what works for you. So I have one child who does pretty much all online programs. I think she has 2. My son, on the other hand, does more offline programs because that's what works for him. He loves workbooks and worksheets and things he can read and then do, where my daughter needs more videos and more audio. And that's great. We have the flexibility to do both. And because I work, it's really important for my children to be able to do things without me sitting right there and saying, okay, now you gotta do this, and now you gotta do this, and now you gotta do this. My kids are also teenagers, so they don't need as much instruction. So that's one of the things that I think is really important. It's also like housework. How many times have you heard people say, well, if you're too exhausted, don't do the dishes. But what if you're the type of person that needs to do the dishes in order to feel peace at home? To feel like you're under control. For me, my thing is to make my bed. Nothing else in my house might get done that day, but if my bed is made, I feel like I've accomplished something. Which is kind of funny because if you walk in my front door, the first thing you're going to see is dishes and dirty counters and floors that might not have been swept in 2 days. And I'm just keeping it real. So I get the kids involved, and yes, they help me. But for me, the thing that works to help me feel like, okay, I can do this, is to make my bed. So if that's the case for you, do that thing that you need to do to make you feel like, okay, I can handle this. If it's washing the dishes, wash the dishes. If it's sweeping the floors, sweep the floors. If that helps you to feel like, okay, I'm under control, then do it. It doesn't really matter what other people say. I think it's really important to consider the idea, so it encourages you to think outside the box. But at the same time, you really need to do what's best for your family. The last thing I want to talk about is work. Some people feel like you can't work in homeschool, which, to be honest, is a lie. But it's, hey, Amy, thanks for joining me. But the thing about work, it's really important to realize what you do control and what you don't. So if you work outside the home or even at home and you have a boss and you have clients and you have deadlines, those things need to be met. And you might not have much control about when they start or when they stop. But homeschooling, although flexible, you also need to do some of it, especially, now remember, you're going to do what works for you, if you're like me and your children need a schedule. So how are you going to do both? It's not always easy, but it can be done. You can fit those things around each other. So again, we're going to go back to that flexibility of homeschooling, which doesn't need to take place between Monday and Friday, 8 to 3, or whatever it is where you live. It can take place on the weekends. It can take place in the evening. And you can also consider things that are outside traditional book work. So when you're at work or doing work, can your kids read books? Can they do art? Can they play games? Can they do online games? All of those things count, quote unquote, as learning, because learning takes place all over the place. And if you're a new homeschooler, that concept might be kind of hard to understand. But I promise you, once you stop and see what is actually taking place, you won't forget it. All of a sudden, you'll start seeing everything that they're learning as they go throughout their day. And if you're setting an example, if you work at home and they're watching you work, or if you work outside of the home and they're watching you get ready, they're learning things such as time management, what's important, what needs to get done, and how to work together. So to wrap this up and not keep you on here, I want to thank you so much for joining me, and to remember that any advice you read, no matter if it's a podcast that you hear, on a book that you're reading, a blog post that you're reading, a video that you're watching, always take that advice, say thank you by all means, but then do what works for you, okay? It will really lessen the overwhelm and release some stress and expectations that you have for yourself. Because it can be really hard to walk someone else's idea of what they think works best for you when they don't walk in your shoes. All right, thanks so much for joining me, and I hope you guys have a great day.